Harkey, Hayashi, Hernandez, Hill, Huber, Waso, Huffman, Jeffries, Jones, Knight, Lara, Logue, Lowenthal, Ma, Mansour, Mendoza, Miller, Mitchell, Monning, Morrell, Nastande, Nilsson, Norby, Olson, Pan, Perea, Vimanuel Perez, Portantino, Silva, Skinner, Smythe, Solorio, Swanson, Torres, Valadeo, Wagner, Wykowski, Williams, Yamada. Mr. Speaker.
Members, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. We ask our Assembly Chaplain, Father Constantine Papadimos, to offer the day's prayer.
Let us pray. Lord, when we face challenges, we tend to focus on them so much that our thoughts become consumed with them. Yet in order to find peace within ourselves, we need to stop and ask, what am I thinking about? Help us to focus our mind in the right direction, Lord, when faced with life's daily problems. Direct our steps and guide our thoughts to you, for you will lead us to the path of peace and will make the rough places into level ground. Amen.
Please continue to stand and remain standing and join us in the flag salute. Please join Assembly Member Halderman as she leads us in the pledge. Ms. Halderman. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, February 2nd, 2011. The Senate met at 9 a.m. Honorable Fiona Mosh, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, presiding. Chief Clerk E. Dawson Wilson at the desk. Assistant Clerk Timothy Moreland reading. The roll was called. Shajian, Alejo, Allen, Amiano, Atkins, Bell, Berryhill.
Mr. Calderon moves. Mr. Hagman seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions. There are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the Governor. There are none. Messages from the Senate. There are none. Motions and resolutions. The absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker and members, I request unanimous consent for Assembly Member Alejo to have guests and photographers on the floor today.
Without objection.
Also, I request unanimous consent to allow Assembly Member Feuer, Hagman, and Pan to speak on Adjourn in Memory.
Without objection.
Also, I request unanimous consent to send file item 1, AB1 by Speaker Perez to the inactive file.
Without objection. Mr. Alejo, would you like to recognize your guests?
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I just wanted to recognize some great community leaders from the wonderful city of Watsonville, Mayor Daniel Dodge, and our redevelopment director, Marty Ackerman. If we could please welcome them, please.
Business on the daily file. Assembly, third reading. Okay, members, we will now move to the resolution relative to Ronald Reagan Day. Without objection, we will take up file item 3, ACR 9. Now, clerk will read.
Assembly concur Resolution 9 by Assemblymember Garrick relative to Centennial Ronald Reagan Day.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and members, it is my great honor to once again rise, as I have in my 4 years of service in this body, to honor the birth of one of our nation's greatest presidents and a man whose administration I had the great privilege of serving in. That's President Ronald Wilson Reagan. ACR 9, the measure before us today, recognizes yesterday, Sunday, February 6, 2011, as the 100th anniversary of the birth of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Among his many accomplishments, he remains the only Californian to both be governor of our great state and president of the United States. To many of us in this body, Ronald Reagan is an icon and a true American hero. He inspired a nation, redefined a political party, and left a legacy of optimism. I think everyone recognizes his optimism and great Irish humor, hope, and a fundamental belief in freedom that is never and will not be diminished. Particularly in these difficult times economically for our country and our state, it is imperative that we remember and spread our former governor's unshakable belief in the inherent goodness of the American people. We must hold firm and reestablish the American way. Freedom in the purest sense, unfettered by the excesses of government intrusion into the free market or the daily lives of individual men and women. I ask that today, of all the days, we reflect on how great our nation is and the freedoms that we have, and renew our commitment to representing the people of California that we are so honored to serve, and that we move our state back to a more prosperous time and state. I strongly urge an aye vote on the resolution and respectfully will ask the first roll to be open for co-authors. I also would like to extend a personal invitation to a fine small establishment across the street, Gallagher's, for a little birthday cake this evening at 5:30 and to raise a glass and toast President Reagan on his 100th birthday, and I will buy. Thank you, Madam.
That's on record. Ms. Atkins.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. I rise in support of the resolution in honor of our former governor and former President Reagan. And one issue near and dear to my heart in particular that I wanted to recognize and show my appreciation for. As a former chair of the San Diego Coalition for Reproductive Choice, a former board member of Planned Parenthood, and certainly as a former clinic provider, I wanted to acknowledge and say how important it was that the governor, 6 years prior to the passage of Roe versus Wade, passed in the state of California the Therapeutic Abortion Act to support and make safe for all women in the state of California. And so it is with pride and honor that I stand and urge support for the resolution today. Thank you.
Mr. Calderon.
Madam Speaker, members, I too rise in support of this resolution. I think it's interesting, before I make comments on, I think Ronald Reagan is one of the more successful presidents in the history of this country. It's interesting to note today that not only Reagan, but Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan would be considered probably too moderate and maybe even liberal today. Eisenhower supported unions. President Nixon advocated for a government health care reform that was more ambitious than President Clinton, and certainly was more than what President Obama got. So I think it's significant that we recognize that this country is made up of Americans. And we sometimes label ourselves by party and other labels, but we're Americans. And as an American, our President Reagan was a member of a union. As a human being, he was the first president to allow a black couple to spend an evening in the White House. He even imposed taxes in California when he was governor that was 30% of the general fund. He did what he had to do. He created welfare, the welfare program in California. But he did it not only as a Republican, he did it as a patriot. He did it as an American, he did it as a Californian. And I think it is appropriate that we recognize his contributions today, and I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise also in support of this resolution recognizing Ronald Reagan's 100th birthday. It was in 1978 when he was just starting his second run for president, when he took a strong position in opposition to the Briggs Initiative in California. And that initiative was to prohibit and was an affront to gays and lesbians in the classroom. So I support this resolution. I support our honor today of that great president. Thank you.
Mr. Cedillo.
Let me add my voice to the chorus. You know, as legislators, as people in charge of the governance of this great state, we come with a different perspective. We have a different duty and a different responsibility. As activists, as advocates, as lobbyists for particular issues, values, for particular agendas, we at different times are too critical of those of us who are here who accept the challenge of governance. So I want to raise my voice, as Senator Calderon did, acknowledge that Governor Reagan is in essence responsible for the expansion of the welfare state in California. He did so with courage and conviction. He did so at a time that required us to raise revenue, to have the resources to invest, to address the challenges of poverty in America. He did so at a time where that was at the top of our national agenda. In the 80s, he faced another challenge. As we were thinking about the world around us, the presence of the Soviet Union, the competition and the move towards a global economy, he saw a need for us to incorporate those immigrants who had come to our nation to become a part of our nation. And he said this in a debate with Walter Mondale in 1994. On this question, he said, "I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and lived here, even though sometime back they may have entered illegally." His words were courageous and expressed his conviction. In his farewell, he said, "I've spoken of a shiny city of all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a proud, tall city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city of free ports humming with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors. And the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here." I second the motion for the president of this state, and of the governor of this state, former governor of this state, president of this nation, Ronald Reagan.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, members, and Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of this resolution. I remember a different Ronald Reagan because I was actually working and in Los Angeles at the time of the previous president. And I recall a nation of shortages where we had no air conditioning. I was on the 23rd floor of a 55-story building that was all glass downtown LA, and we could not have air conditioning. If you can imagine, because we were told that we had to conserve and we couldn't afford our profligate lifestyle anymore, that, you know, our era of supremacy was almost over. We had wars breaking out all over, similar to what we've got now, a lot of unrest in the Middle East. And we also had over 20% interest rates and inflation. We had a figure that was called the Misery Index, which measured inflation, and I believe it was unemployment. I can't recall right now. I think that was it, inflation and unemployment. And that misery index was sky high. People were suffering. We thought we were through. We were one of the worst countries in the world, supposedly, and we just had to pay our dues and get over it because we were no longer going to reign supreme. Then Ronald Reagan came, and he promised a shining city on the hill. And he returned that can-do American spirit to all of us. He made us proud. He took stands that were principled. You know, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. That was a bold statement in those days. He got ridiculed from all sides for having said such a thing that was surely going to just create more chaos. But you know what? That wall came down because the man believed in that. He believed in the, I know he passed the immigration bill, but there was also supposed to be another part of it that went along with it to help control that never did get passed. But he did believe in allowing people a chance to come to this great country. There were numerous things that he did. He had readjusted the tax code. Some people didn't like it. I was there in 1986. It was called TFRA, the Tax Reform Act. I was sitting there as a banker with a bunch of CPAs trying to figure out who was going to be moved around, what was going to happen. But it really did make the tax code a lot more fair. It also brought the marginal rate down from 70, I believe, to in the 30s. I mean, we had a lot of things that went on with Ronald Reagan, a lot of important changes for this nation. But most of all, the spirit of can-do returned. The spirit of what we were all about, of pioneering and reaching for the stars and actually getting there, because you could, as an American, from the lowest walk of life, you could be whatever you wanted to be. And I think that's what all of us are still fighting for, to have our children and our children's children have that opportunity, that great opportunity. And it comes from a spirit of can-do. And I can't emphasize that more. There is nothing that we can't do on this floor, in this state, in this country, if we believe in ourselves and we're willing to put the work to it. And our children should have that legacy. Ronald Reagan created that back in this country, that feeling of Americanism and pride in being American, and that's what I will remember him for. Thank you.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise today as the chair of the Assembly Aging and Long-Term Care Committee to thank the members for recognizing the centenarian birthday of Ronald Reagan. I'm sorry that he's not here to celebrate with us in person, but there are a lot of centenarians in our midst, and I encourage all of us to recognize those in your districts who are turning 100 with great frequency. So today's symbolism, I think, goes beyond just recognizing Ronald Reagan. I also wanted to note that in the lovely packets that we have received from Mr. Garrick, you will see Jelly Bellies. And I wanted to note that the worldwide headquarters for Jelly Bellies is in my district in Fairfield. Those of you who travel along the I-80 corridor no doubt see that wonderful freeway sign off to the left with the red jelly bean with the little cute hat on. I guess it would be red, wouldn't it, not blue. But we know that President Reagan had a great fondness for the Jelly Belly family and the Jelly Belly product line and brought that into prominence. Perhaps we should look at that as a metaphor. You know, lots of different colors in the Jelly Belly family seeming to all be able to get along. So thank you for this opportunity to share.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Raj, to join the chorus of support for this. One thing I want to point out is that when this state was in crisis, Governor Reagan signed a budget that was 30% of the general fund he raised in taxes. We don't need that kind of guts this time around, but it's important, I think, that we have the spirit of Ronald Reagan, who was able to cross divides, was able to look at a balanced equation as we work toward our budget season. And so I'd like us to keep his spirit in mind as we move forward in the budget process.
Mr. Speaker.
Members, I rise in support of this resolution. Like my colleague from South Orange County, I remember a different Reagan. He was certainly one of the most transformational political figures in American history, and he was a quintessential Californian. Like millions of others, he immigrated here from the Midwest to seek a better life. In California, he found a place where he had almost limitless opportunities and was able to live his California dream. As governor, he worked with Democratic leaders like Jess Unruh and Willie Brown, and he kept that spirit alive when he went to Washington, forging a warm and genuine friendship with the legendary Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. Certainly, he achieved much while governor and much more while president. History will recall the role he played in ending the Cold War and the groundbreaking work he did in trying to eliminate nuclear weapons once and for all at the summit in Reykjavik with Gorbachev. But his ultimate legacy is in the millions of men and women that he inspired to be politically active, including myself. I'm certainly not the first person you'd think of when you imagine people being inspired by Ronald Reagan. But yesterday at the end of Meet the Press, there was an interview with his son, Michael. And Michael talked about the fact that Reagan's political activism was motivated by Bobby Kennedy, that it was the disagreements that he had with Bobby Kennedy that motivated him to get involved in politics. Well, the same is true for me with Ronald Reagan. We all know that in politics, as in nature, every action has an equal and opposing reaction. Some of President Reagan's proposals affected my family very directly. My mother worked at a community clinic providing health care to senior citizens. And the Reagan cuts to Health and Human Services greatly affected her ability to provide those services for people in our community. His reforms to SSI and disability also affected my family. My father had worked as a sheet metal worker by day and a cook by night and was injured in an industrial accident that left him unable to walk for years and unable to work. And the changes that the Reagan administration put forward took him off the benefits that he had earned and made him reprove his disability, leaving our family without those benefits that he had worked so hard for quite some time. I was young and clearly saw the decisions that were being made and how they affected my family and my community. It was one of the catalytic forces that inspired me to become active in the political process. President Reagan, like FDR before him, inspired hopeful passions among millions in our country, both for and against his administration. And like President Roosevelt, we will be debating his legacy for decades to come. That debate continues today, and it will be some time before history can render a definitive verdict. But regardless of our views on Reagan the politician, we can all be proud that such a transformational leader came from our state. Whether calling for Gorbachev to tear down this wall or bringing our nation together after 7 brave astronauts slipped the surly bonds of Earth, we're all proud that Ronald Reagan was first and foremost a Californian. I ask for an aye vote on this resolution.
Mr. Garrick, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to first thank my colleagues for their collective memories of Reagan and their comments. It shows the diversity that we have in our state and right here in the Assembly. I only wish to ask for the vote with the final statement that I did have the pleasure of working with him as a gentleman that truly loved this country, approached things in an optimistic manner, and believed that with faith and strength and what I would call my 3 R's, as he had his Ronald Reagan, the 2 R's, reason, respect, and responsibility, in a free country, anything's possible. And that we should only guarantee the opportunity and not the outcome. And with that, I ask that the roll be opened for co-authors, and thank you.
Seeing and hearing no further discussion or debate, we will move to vote on the measure. The first roll call will be for co-authors on ACR 9. The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 62 co-authors on the measure. We can take a voice vote on this item. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. The session schedule is as follows. Tuesday, February 8th, check-in session. Wednesday, February 9th, check-in session. Thursday, February 10th, floor session at 9 a.m. Friday, February 11th, no floor session, no check-in session. All other items will be passed and retained. All motions shall be continued. We will now move to request to adjourn in memory. The following members were previously granted permission to speak on adjourn in memories today. Mr. Feuer.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's with great sadness that I rise to adjourn in memory of John Liebert. John Liebert was the father of Drew Liebert, whom many of you know is the chief counsel to the Assembly Judiciary Committee. John Liebert passed away last night after a short and courageous battle with cancer. He was 81. As a boy, he emigrated from Nazi Germany and grew up in New York City. He earned his bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and his law degree from Hastings. And then John Liebert built an outstanding reputation in the public sector labor relations field with a pioneering law firm which focused on labor and employment training programs. He helped found Liebert, Cassidy, and Whitmore, which has become one of the state's leading public management, labor, employment, and education law firms with more than 70 attorneys and four offices. John Liebert was recognized by both the National and California Public Employer Labor Relations Associations with their highest awards of excellence. He was preceded in death by his wife, Marika, and son, Doug. And John Liebert is survived by our friend, Drew Liebert, his daughter, by John's daughter, Deb. There are 9 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, and hundreds of colleagues, friends, and protégés who will forever be in the debt of John Liebert and collectively will strive to honor his memory. I ask that we adjourn in the memory of John Liebert.
Mr. Hagman?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise to adjourn memory of Roosevelt Ross Lucio Alfredo Fernandez of San Bernardino County, who passed away November 19, 2010 from a heart attack. Born in Goa in 1945, he grew up in Bangalore, India, before coming to the United States and working as an engineer, first for Niagara Mohawk Power Company in Syracuse, New York, and later for Southern California Edison in Rosemead in Irwindale, California. He was involved in cutting-edge research on innovative ways to improve power transmission and alternative technologies for power production. He also developed numerous U.S. patents for his inventions in the power field. After retirement, he worked as a consultant for companies manufacturing his inventions. He was a devoted Lakers fan. He loved all aspects of space exploration, and his famous hobby during his working years and after retirement was tennis. which he played mostly at the Claremont Tennis Club in Claremont, California. Ross cared greatly for others and demonstrated this love through his final act, giving his body to scientific research through MedCure in order to help the living. He was predeceased by his father and his brother Terrence and survived by his mother, his sons Benjamin and Vaughn, his grandchildren Sophia and James, his brothers Peter and Paul, his sisters Jeanette, and several nieces and nephews. Therefore, I ask that the Assembly adjourns in memory of Ross Fernandez today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Pan, Dr. Pan.
Madam Speaker, members, I rise to adjourn in memory of Sam Lacara, a resident of my district who is dedicated to improving education and health and children. Mr. Lacara, a principal at Louisiana Schnell Elementary School, was tragically shot last Wednesday in his own school. Principal Lacara was described as a father to all the kids, where he knew every one of his students' names, greeted them at the front of the school in the mornings, and sometimes opened car doors for them as their parents dropped them off. In 2008, under Principal Lacara's tenure, Schnell received the distinction of a Title I Academic Achievement Award for his school, and Schnell also subsequently received the California School Garden Network's School Garden of the Year Award. Mr. Lacara is survived by his wife, Lisa, and his 3 daughters. And I, again, ask that we adjourn in his memory. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Please bring the names of the desk to be printed in the journal. I am ready to entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Calderon moves. Mr. Hagman seconds. That this House stands adjourned until Thursday, February 10th at 9 a.m. Quorum call is lifted.